Arrow here. Welcome back to the Truth Behind the Scales podcast, where we find ourselves in a space for truth, shadow, and possibility. No filters, no scripts, just a real conversation. Let's begin. All right, so let's talk nourishment. So, this is something that goes hand in hand with shadow work because one without the other stalls you out. So, when we talk about nourishment, we're talking about the things that can stabilize and strengthen us, right? So we want to do a number of things that keep us present with reality, right? Because when we do shadow work, we're delving into heavy things where we may have to revisit certain scenarios or feelings. And sometimes that can be unsettling, uncomfortable, and it can put us in a funk, right? So now, when we look to nourish ourselves, we can do it one of many ways, right? The first is allowing ourselves a lot of sleep, rest, and recovery in between this shadow work process, right? You want to be able to give yourself a lot of rest, right? Just as much as we're willing to give ourselves a lot of grace, part of that graciousness that we should give ourselves is giving us that nourishment to be able to rest and recover accordingly, right? We can also give ourselves emotional nourishment, which is safety, consistency, truth, and boundaries. And these are things that we've been looking at very closely in different ways throughout this entire process of this podcast, right? So it's important that we take the time to nourish ourselves throughout this process. Well, Arrow, what happens if I don't nourish myself in the process of doing the shadow work? Well, it can lead to one of many things. You can end up ruminating. You can end up self-punishing yourself, self-sabotaging. You can end up maybe perhaps at a point where you may look to hyper focus on fixing yourself so much that it creates this thing where you are not allowing yourself to grow accordingly, right? So even just thinking about plants, right? Plants need time to grow. And do they grow quickly? Yeah, sure. Some do, others don't, right? But in that respect, right, we can compare ourselves to, say, bamboo, right? Long before you even see the sprout of a bamboo sprout out of the ground, it grows roots. There's roots that will grow first long before it starts to grow feet high, okay? Like crazy tall. So, in that sense, you got to remember, okay, things are not going to happen overnight. And so I must nourish so that way I give myself that grace and I allow myself to be present, to embrace the process in a nice, healthy way where I can feel safe about doing the shadow work, remaining consistent so that way I can grow and heal and learn those lessons that need to be learned, discover the truth and accept the truth, and then ultimately have nice, healthy boundaries. Sometimes we forget that the boundaries that we set in place are not just necessarily for other people, but for ourselves as well. Sometimes we have to give ourselves boundaries so that way we don't end up doing certain things that hinder us along the process. So that means that we are looking to put ourselves in a position where we are constantly giving ourselves nourishment, that self love, that care, so that way we can regulate ourselves well enough so that way we can do the work and we don't burn out ultimately, right? Now, nourishing oneself can be rather challenging. I know that for me, it took a lot of practice, so to speak, for me to be able to come to a point where I allow myself to sleep, rest, and recover. Now, I'm one of those people that have gotten into this loop of like, okay, if I'm not continuously doing the shadow work and whatever work necessary for me to grow and heal, I'm not getting better. And that is so not true. And it's important that I take breaks, right? We don't have to spend 24/7 healing. Okay. You can choose to take some days to heal, right? To reflect on some things, do the shadow work, really sit with feelings. Of course, not avoiding them, but eventually circling back around to them. But you can take pauses in between. If you have taken the time to feel your feelings, to do whatever work necessary to learn and accept things and grow from them, then, allow that to sit, right? And allow it to integrate into the person that you are now becoming, that's still unraveling and continues to unravel as time moves on. So it's important to really give ourselves that, again, grace and nourishment necessary, so that way we can move forward and not be in that mindset of like, I need to do this all the time in order for me to be okay. That, by contrast, will actually destabilize you, because then now you're just kind of on edge and you're just like, I gotta get this done. So that was something that I had to really work on, so that way I wouldn't be in that space. So I feel like in my process, in order for me at first to feel safe when I was looking to heal from this breakup, was that I needed to feel safe. There was a part of me that just felt unsafe altogether in many ways. And that was the first thing that was necessary for me to tackle in order for me to then be able to sit with myself and sit with my thoughts and not feel the extreme discomfort that comes with being in that space of like, I'm not safe. So there were a lot of instances where I felt like I wasn't safe. And one way in which I initially looked to make myself feel safe was to remind myself of my current reality. Now, of course, my current reality at the time was not ideal at the time. Like, so much had changed around me. I was still in that shock, and it almost felt like I was just tripping. Like, I was just like, whoa, okay, like, this can't be my current reality. But then there was another part of me, like I mentioned before, that would sit there and constantly remind myself, okay, you are no longer with this person. This person is no longer in your life. And the dream that you once had of this person being in your life long term is like no longer existent. So now, of course, that was necessary, but eventually that changed to more gentler ways of reminding myself, okay, things have changed for you, but now what can we do to feel better about it, right? So, in order for us to feel safe, we're looking to regulate our nervous system. And sometimes we do have to remind ourselves about our current reality, but we for sure want to do it in a way where it is graceful and gentle. So we want to give ourselves the time, we want to give ourselves the patience, right? But we also want to be super nice and gentle. So in the process, I had to learn to remind myself that I was okay, even though I did not feel that way. I had to remind myself that even despite the fact that things felt empty, that I, in fact, still had many things around me, that I had not lost everything, that love was not lost. It was just me having to remember that in the end, no matter what, I am still loved and cared for, and that there are things that surround me that I wasn't fully aware of just yet. And so, as I continued to heal and grow and learn from this experience, I eventually started to regulate my nervous system, where like I could be able to talk about the matter without feeling unsafe. So, meaning that I wouldn't go into fight or flight, because, of course, there was nothing that I couldn't do before I ended up in a fight or flight. Okay. So, eventually allowing myself to feel everything and to work through the entire breakup and how I felt and what could ultimately come out of it, I ended up building a mind that was able to feel safe, a body that could actually relax for a bit, and where I can breathe and just be like, okay, even though things have changed, I'm okay. Because let's face it, if we end up at a place where we are feeling unsafe 24/7, we will be dysregulated, super exhausted, and will ultimately feel worse long term. So we may at times confuse it with being brave, but the truth is we have to be able to nourish ourselves. So once we start nourishing ourselves, we will eventually have a nervous system that believes that nothing bad will happen to them if you're honest about what your current reality is, right? So this means that your nervous system will not look to brace for any backlash. You're not gonna keep evading whatever feelings, thoughts, concerns that you have in order for you to keep the peace, but instead looking to see things for what they really are and looking to embrace them. So that way, again, you're not looking to put yourself in a position where you take everything and you put it in the back burner and it still continues to linger. And so it's important that when you do regulate your nervous system, that you eventually feel like whatever it is that has happened is not going to continue to happen, right? Because sometimes when we go through certain things in life, we may feel like, okay, I need to continue expecting the next punishment, the next abandonment, or the chaos that I've already gotten so accustomed to being surrounded by. This is where consistency comes into play. Consistency will calm the body because it reminds you how there's no need to be hyper vigilant. And so, what do we mean by that? Well, we are looking to nourish and care for ourselves as much as we can, as often as we can. And so long as we continue to show consistency in that, we will feel so much better about whatever it is that will allow us to regulate our nervous system. And so this will be something that will tie very closely into the truth, right? What will allow us to name the things that we have gone through, name the feelings that came out of those experiences, and we eventually find ourselves letting go, accepting things for what they were, and eventually letting go. So it's important to not sugarcoat things or lie to ourselves to stay regulated because, of course, that is something that will not help you in the long term, right? Certain things serve as a band aid, and you don't want to use any band aids. If you need to clean your wound and you need to put on some stitches so that way it can heal properly, that would be the best route. Because, of course, if you have a deep wound and you put a band aid on it, it's not going to heal. It's an open wound, right? Or it will take centuries to heal before it could even, get to a point where it's tolerable and it doesn't affect you anymore. But why put yourself through the lengthy process of an unhealed open wound that may get infected here and there when you can just address it as soon as possible, even despite the fact that it's uncomfortable? Hey, sure, of course, an open wound is going to hurt terribly, but once you give it what it needs, like it's going to heal nicely, hopefully, right? But for sure, like it's going to heal and it is going to be so much better. And before you know it, it's closed and you don't really feel it anymore. So, this is something that is ultimately non negotiable. And with that, what's also non negotiable are boundaries. So, of course, you want to keep your self respect intact. And again, this is not something that you direct toward others only, it's toward ourselves as well, right? You are not looking to build a wall, but rather a filter. So that way you can discover the things that you will and will not tolerate, right? Who has access to you, and whether or not a certain behavior ends a conversation, a relationship, or a situation that you are dealing with at the moment, right? And these are crucial things in which we need to learn in order for us to keep this healthy mind, to keep healthy relationships, and to just overall be able to stand up for ourselves and keep that honesty going, right? There are certain things that are what they are, but it doesn't mean that we have to stand by it or keep it just because we want to keep the peace. There's ultimately things that we have to let go of that don't serve us, and that's okay. Like I mentioned before, there's going to be instances where we have to say no, and there's nothing wrong with that. We don't always have to say yes to everything, but we can certainly say no. So, consistency for me was something that I built for myself on the basis of me showing up for myself, even on the days where I felt like I couldn't. And these were the hard days where I had been crying, I had been exhausted, and just feeling so much to a point where it felt unbearable, right? But these were the moments where I needed myself the most. And it was more so, especially because I was in a place where I felt like I couldn't reach out and ask for help. I didn't think that there was anyone on the planet that could possibly be there for me the way that I would have liked them to, simply because I had been to a point where I felt like, you know what? The actions of people do not match the things that they say, so why even bother? Right? And of course, that wasn't true. There were plenty of people that were there for me from day one, right? And even though it didn't feel like much at the time because I had been going through so much pain, that was there, you know? I just needed to find myself and really look to meet with myself so often so that way I can be able to see the abundance that was around me, and I was abundant in love. It's just that I was completely blinded by what I had experienced. And so I looked to show up for myself consistently, even if I wasn't fully aware, and just looking to like really take note of that. Because of course, we all want to do certain things like, okay, you know what? I want to heal. I don't want to feel this any longer. But now, what steps are we taking in order for us to be able to heal our wounds so that way we ultimately don't feel the the pain of an open wound, you know? So I looked to remain consistent in this healing process, making sure that I was doing the necessary shadow work in order for me to be able to feel better, to feel safe, and not believe what my mind had already believed for a while, which was like, okay, I can't trust people, and, whatever it is that I look for, I can't find. So I looked to meet with my therapist as often as I could. I looked to journal in a shadow work journal as much as I could because I'm not really a fan of journaling, but I tried to pick and choose certain things that I felt would work for me, right? And I would talk about it as much as I could. I would do anything possible to allow myself to feel, even if it was just so exhausting, but still giving myself grace. And this took a lot of time, but that consistency really did help my nervous system so much to a point where now I feel safe where I am. Just being comfortable, being in this journey, even if it does get frustrating sometimes. But showing up for myself was the best thing that I could have ever done. And that's something that I would greatly advise to others, because it's like, again, if you have yourself and you build a solid foundation, nothing can really stop you, right? There's nothing that anyone can do, say, because you've got you. And that is truth, right? Once you have you and you build yourself up, you're good. Now, once you feel safe and you've developed this level of consistency, now you're looking to meet the truth. And the truth hurts. The truth hurts. But listen, there's nothing more worthwhile than coming face to face to what the truth is and being able to set yourself free. Once you start naming feelings, people, anything that you might have been afraid to tackle, you allow yourself to accept and eventually be free. It took me what felt like forever to even name my ex whenever I looked to revisit certain things that were still bothering me throughout this healing journey. And that was something that I could not do for a long time simply because I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that this person had caused me so much pain. And there was a part of me, a part of the back of my mind that felt like, you know what, that's kind of crazy. Who knew that this person that I loved so much and that I saw a future with could have done this, right? And so this was something that was hard, right, for me to name and to really name the feelings. Okay, I felt disappointed. I felt abandoned by this person. You know, feeling really, truly heartbroken. Naming these things were things that I could not do, right? And it was so hard because I had to really sit there and really hold this person to what they really were and not what they weren't. I knew that I had placed this person on a pedestal, and that made me see them completely different from what they actually were. And that is not fair considering that not even I was held to a high regard at this time. And yet I had this person on a pedestal even when they had hurt me this much. So it took me a very long time to be able to come to terms with everything that happened, who had done it, how I felt about it, and looking to accept all of that. But I definitely was able to do so just based off of this build of nourishment toward myself. Once I had safety, consistency, and truth, I built my boundaries. Girl, if anybody speaks to me at one point or another, I'm talking about boundaries. Boundaries comes up all the time because this is something that I highly encourage that people build and that they uphold every single time it's needed without fail. Because once you have that, you will not look to self betray. You will not look to overlook red flags. You will not tolerate the things that you once did because you will be in a place where you know what's best and you will filter out all the BS that does not belong in your space, in your mind. So I for sure ended up with a number of boundaries that has led me to be in a better place and to be surrounded by people that think the same, right? So this is, again, something that I went through that I've ultimately learned from. And like I've mentioned before, it was such a gift. A gift. Again, another thing that I could not say at the time. I truly thought that I was being punished when I was going through this experience at first. But no, it was a gift. So now I'm the type of person that will say no. I will not engage in certain conversations if I feel like it's not good for my mental health or just something that is good in general in my eyes. You know, I will notice red flags. I will question things a little bit more. I would like to actually engage in more conversations where I get to know people better and really, build on my discernment based off of what I gather, right? Because discernment is a really great thing to have because that is what will also uphold your boundaries as much as possible. And so this is something that I have been working on and continue to work on, of course, because these are important things to have. And so I have my boundaries. I will stand for what's right for me. I will not make myself little and I will not neglect my needs. for the sake of keeping the peace. I will speak up for myself. If there's things that I disagree with, if there's things that I don't like, if there's anything that I need to say, so that way people know that I'm aware of what's happening in that moment, I will do so. There will be plenty of people that will not like that. A lot of people will frame you as the bad guy just because you upheld your boundaries. But again, like I've told plenty of people, I don't need to disrespect you, curse you out, or even touch you, fight you for any means, by any means, to get my point across. I can say so respectfully, and all I ask is that you respect the decisions that I've made and that you respect whatever it is that I've said, because, hey, I could have totally gone the other way and done everything else possible to make my point. But again, I don't need to. I can say so gracefully, and that is that, right? No hard feelings, no beef, just pure respect, not just for you, but more so for myself. So this is something that requires, nevertheless, nourishment. This is something that will keep you in a place where you can continue to build on that aspect of feeling safe, keeping that consistency going, seeing things for what they really are, and then circling back around to building yourself well enough so that way you know what to look out for whenever you see it. And then if you need to move away, if you need to rethink things, reconsider things, you can do so, because again, you know yourself well enough and you want to keep yourself safe and trust in your judgment. And you can only really do so if you feel safe with yourself and that you are making the right calls because you have established boundaries that keep you strong and healthy. So the idea is this, that you look to allow nourishment to work very closely with shadow work, in the sense that you always nourish first. This will help you regulate your nervous system. Then you look to do shadow work so that way things can become honest instead of overwhelming. And then you circle back into nourishment, because then that will allow you to integrate all the things that you've been able to uncover through the process. And so this will lead us into the next episode, which is revive. All right, remember, we're looking to not put ourselves in a state where we're constantly looking to survive, but rather put ourselves in a place where we look to live. All right, so thank you for tuning in. Light and love to all.